Next, we'll look at one of the most popular and robust features in the entire OSF toolkit. And I'm talking about the user activity module. Now, users of OSForensics versions 1 through version 6 knew this module as the recent activity module, but starting back in version 7, it was renamed to the user activity to better reflect the data that it does retrieve. The user activity module is a collection of individual artifact scans, all running simultaneously to create a master timeline of all activity. The user activity module provides investigators with an impressive amount of artifactual evidence at equally impressive speeds. The user activity module scans the system for evidence such as accessed websites, installed programs, USB, device history, online search terms, wireless network history, recent downloads, and much, much more. This is especially useful for identifying trends and patterns of a user, including file, folder, web, and USB activity and history. It's no wonder this is one of our users' most favorite features. In a way, it's sort of like an automated basic forensic exam done for you in roughly about 30 seconds or so, depending on the system. Clicking on the config button will open the configuration options. Here you could deselect certain artifacts you may not wish to include in your scan, which you can also do on the main user activity module screen simply by unchecking the artifacts prior to the scan. Note that the artifacts listed in the advanced scan category as outlined in this slide are not checkmarked by default. So if you did want shimcache, SRUM, prefetch, and the Windows search artifacts, which by the way, the Windows search artifacts are the windows.edb ESE database file that's parsed and categorized. But if you want any of those artifacts, you'll need to checkmark these categories prior to running the scan. And at the bottom you can see where you can also perform a search based on a specified date range. So let's take a look at some of the main artifacts recovered in this recent or most recent user activity scan. Most recently used files are MRUs, as they're often called, refer to registry artifacts that point to recent files, usage of files used by applications such as Microsoft Office, Windows Media Player, Windows Explorer, and more. Windows event logs are a very useful artifact in almost every investigation. Event logs records things such as system login, shutdown times, drivers and software installations, system clock changes, and now even in Windows 10 we track individual USB device connects and disconnect times. Installed programs and auto run give you a quick look at all installed applications on that system and which are those set to auto run at startup. USB devices section is a very powerful scan for displaying all history of USB devices which have been attached to the system, including first and last connection times, USB device make and model, serial numbers, and more. The WLAN category shows you a list of all previously connected Wi-Fi networks. Shell bags category are that's a very valuable registry artifact which tracks folder usage. So if date and time stamps of when a particular folder may have been accessed are of importance to you, you will certainly want to review shellbag artifacts, which are acquired from the userclass.dat and the ntuser.dat registry hives. Cookies, downloads, the search terms, etc., all the different browser-based categories within the search are going to pretty self-explanatory, but provide you extensive amount of internet-related artifacts and even a history of searches conducted by users in the search terms category, which is a very nice feature. In addition to these web artifacts, you'll also note file activity records found in the URL section, as Windows Explorer and Internet Explorer utilize that same storage location. So this is actually a great section to also review for some file activity, which will include the full path of that file. Website logins as well, where you can recover usernames, passwords, URLs of login sites, and a lot more. All right, we'll look at the prefetch and shimcache artifacts. So we'll look at prefetch a little later in the course in more depth in the in a separate module where we have a particular viewer just set aside for prefetch artifacts, but it is a very valuable resource for determining if particular software has ever been ran on that particular system. So in addition to last run time and run count and how many times the application has been ran by the user, the run count number does not account for any auto run launches of the application, so keep that in mind too. Also, for more recent versions of Windows, you'll see date and timestamps for the last 8 previous application launches. And then the shimcache artifacts, kind of somewhat lesser known maybe artifact, but is also very valuable in particular cases. Shimcache is similar to prefetch in that it stores application history, but may also be the only source of app history on some systems where maybe prefetch service has been disabled or is maybe disabled by default, such as with the Windows server systems. The recycle bin section, it's a great way to quickly view the contents of the recycle bin and see the file's original file name, path, and date and time it was deleted and sent to the recycle bin. Starting back in Windows 7, when a file is deleted by a user, it is renamed and placed into the recycle bin along with an additional file which stores metadata about the file, such as the original file name, path, etc. So the actual file itself can be identified as it will start with a $R followed by some random characters. Now, the information file associated with that deleted file will have the same file name, with the exception that instead of beginning with a $R, the information file will begin with a $I instead. And so OSF's recycle bin parser here reviews the contents of the $I file and displays the files in the recycle bin as they were prior to the deletion by the user. So it's just a lot more friendly way to view the contents of a recycle bin. Mounted volumes displays drive letter history as retrieved from the system hive. The user assist artifacts are a very valuable artifact, as this is where you will find link files and executable history. Jump list items and SRUM artifacts that will include lots of information on access folders and files. And then the SRUM artifacts are one of the more kind of recent additions to this module. And again, this was in one of those that's in the advanced category for advanced artifacts and won't be returned or scanned for unless the user goes into the config and enables that artifact to be scanned for. But so SRUM in a nutshell will show some application and network usage, log some network connection times, which can be valuable to certain investigations. So just keep that in mind. Form items. So this displays all stored form history from numerous web browsers, including IE and Edge, Firefox, Chrome, Opera, etc. So names, addresses, phone numbers, and more can be recovered. The Windows search item, like I said, just a few slides back, it displays the parsed contents of that windows.edb file, which is an ESE database file. And this service runs in Windows and automatically indexes new files and keeps up with changes to the file system. So here this information is presented in a much easier to view format as opposed to the more comprehensive and robust view within our ESE database viewer module. Peer-to-peer artifacts section, so that's going to be presented all the artifacts related to certain popular peer-to-peer applications. So things like BitTorrent, Emule, etc. And last on this slide is the Windows timeline category. And so in Windows 10, they introduced the new Windows timeline feature. And so OSForensics can parse this data here in the Windows timeline category. And again, this is a snippet of, there's many other categories and some artifacts within the user activity module which are being presented to you, or which can be presented to you. The default sorting option is in date descending order, which in essence is what's going to create that timeline of all user activity on the computer. So again, this is something that can be done in roughly 30 seconds or so. You'll see the last events that occurred on the system before you seized it, and then you can simply scroll down or scroll backwards to just walk backwards in time throughout that activity on that machine. Of course, if you needed to change it to one of these other options, you would simply make the selection there in the lower right hand corner of the screen as shown here in this slide. In a live scenario, you may wish to export the entire timeline of activity to maybe an HTML or CSV file. And if you are exporting a large number of artifacts, I would personally recommend to choose CSV format for better responsiveness of the file. If you were in a lab scenario conducting a static exam on a system drive or image file, you might want to add the entire timeline of activity to your case as a particular bookmark. So in this scenario, you would simply right-click in the main view pane and choose Add Results to the Case option. If only the artifacts from one of the categories are of interest, you can click off of the All at the very top, which just displays all of the artifacts, and you can click just specifically on one of the categories of interest there in that categories pane, which will then just in the display pane only show those types of artifacts. So for example, in this slide, the USB category was clicked on and selected, and therefore only the USB artifact history is displayed there in the main viewing pane. So just as in the previous examples, when all was selected and displayed, you would simply right-click and choose the Add Results to Case option to add just all of those USB artifacts to your case. And finally, you can use the checkboxes, obviously, to selectively choose specific artifacts. Then, once all files of interest are checked, you can then just add the group of checked files to your case, or export that list of checked files to a particular type of file like HTML, CSV, or text file, like we saw a few slides back. And you also will see an option titled Tag Files. Now, remember, this option will allow you to mark, or aka tag, any files or artifacts during your examination throughout OSForensics for easy review at a later time. So all tagged items will be added to the tagged items category back in the Manage Case module, as we'll see here in the next slide. So a question I get asked fairly often is how destructive maybe is a cleaning or anti-forensic tool such as CCleaner. Well, the answer really depends on multiple variables. However, for most users, the cleaning process eliminates less artifacts than maybe one might think. Here we see the results of the user activity scan on a live system prior to running CCleaner. And you can see OSF found 343,365 artifacts on this particular live system. So we then installed CCleaner and used all the default settings. We ran a default scan to clean the system, and we see that 658 megabytes of data was removed from the system, which, yes, that is a fairly substantial amount of data. A subsequent user activity scan still found 313,506 artifacts after that CCleaner scan was completed. So out of over 343,000 artifacts, CCleaner only removed less than 30,000 of those. So here's a breakdown on the differences. 3 fewer prefetch files were removed. 7 jump list artifacts were removed. One user assist was removed, 20 browser bookmarks, 25,000 browser history artifacts, 97 downloads were removed, a little shy of 4,000 cookies, 122 MRUs were removed, and almost 2,500 still remained. So as you can see, there's still a lot of useful data here.